Okay, let's get started. People will join in while I do my intro. A very warm welcome to everybody from wherever you're dialing in from. By way of introduction, my name is Deborah Keller, and I lead on the Global Impact for Breakfast initiative. This is a specialized informal group that has been gathering and growing since 2008 in London. We started off with a small group of investors and have today grown to a network of 4,000 members. We are in 35 different cities/chapters around the globe, and they all have the same intention to build informal communities where people come together and learn from each other. Our objective with this informal gathering is to build relationships, learnings, and drive more action, and ultimately also more capital into the impact sector. We host in-person events and also online events like this one. Impact for Breakfast is an informal network of family offices, foundations, funds, venture philanthropy, and intermediary organizations, all with a common focus on social enterprise, entrepreneurship, and impact investing. For those who are here for the first time and haven't heard of us before, you're welcome to visit our webpage, impactforbreakfast.com. I'll share the link afterwards in the chat field to learn more about us. And you're also, of course, welcome to join us as a member. Today, I have the huge pleasure to be hosting this session with my colleague Audrey Selian, who's the director of Artha Impact and co-founder of Artha Networks, with Nora Bave, general partner at Unconventional Ventures, and Sana Tapadia, who's a chief catalyst at Heading for Change. And today we'll be speaking about unlocking gender-smart climate finance and the why and the how. So really looking forward to this. Before we dive into the topic, I want to inform you that this session is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording in a follow-up note afterwards. You're also very welcome to share it with your network or people that should be here actually today and that should see and be part of this, so at least to get the information. After the presentations, we'll move over to a Q&A discussion round like always. Again, this is an informal group, so we'd love to hear your comments, your questions. Just dive in, unmute yourself, and share your ideas and comments. But if you can't speak, you can also use the chat field on the side, and we'll make sure to bring your question to this round. Audrey will be moderating this session today, so we'll hopefully can cover everything in today's hour. So that's it from me. And I'll hand over to you, dear Audrey.
Thank you, Debbie. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all and to see so many familiar faces in the virtual crowd. Today's topic is a really important one, not least because of the friends and practitioners that so many of us have known and worked with who are passionate about this topic. In the impact investing and venture philanthropy spaces, it's obvious today that climate as a cross-cutting thematic is probably one of the most important threads that's woven through both the reality and our perceptions of the opportunity for impact. And climate strategies can be extremely broad and will focus on a wide range of interventions that span the domains of resilience, adaptation, mitigation, etc. But where climate meets gender can be both a highly subjective and objective exercise. And today we'll have a chance to dig deeper into what this means and how it shows up in the vast landscape of social innovation that's both nonprofit and for-profit, and what we as a community of mission-driven investors should look for and think about as the trends and practices of what works best become apparent. So this gathering is about an opportunity to explore the current landscape of gender-smart climate finance. So we'll hear from Nora about how Unconventional Ventures have integrated climate, gender, and diversity into their investment strategies. And we'll hear from Sana about the origins of Heading for Change, how this initiative has been positioned, and what it seeks to achieve. And her colleague Natalie as well will get into more detail around some of their processes in place and structure so that others may be able to partake and collaborate and certainly reach out on the back of these exchanges. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm just your humble moderator. I'll hand it over to Sana, maybe to begin. And please do introduce yourselves, a little bit about your personal journeys, etc. I think that'll be very helpful. And then we can go from there. Please do put your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat, and hopefully we'll have some space and room for a good exchange after some of the formal parts of our morning have completed. So thank you. Over to you, Sana.
Thank you so much, Audrey and Debbie, for the invitation to join this Impact for Breakfast morning, and welcome to everybody. And it might not be morning for everybody, depending on where you're dialing in from. So welcome to this beautiful space. It is gorgeous and sunny in London. I don't think you normally get to say those words, so feeling very grateful to be here. It's a pleasure to join and speak a little bit about Heading for Change and how we're trying to use capital as a way to bridge gender equality gaps, but maybe a little bit of background as Audrey prompted. So, and yes, we even have someone from the Midwest. Welcome. I don't know what time it is, but wonderful to have you here. So I have always worked in the field of finance and from more commercial to impact investing, and then got into gender lens investing in the last decade or so, and have had the absolute pleasure and privilege of working alongside one of the pioneers of gender lens investing, who many of you must know, Suzanne Biegel. And Suzanne was always thinking ahead. And so even thinking ahead about this gender and climate finance nexus, as Audrey said, a cross-cutting theme. And so all of us at Heading for Change are really delighted to be able to take Suzanne's legacy forward. Over the last 2 years, Suzanne was unwell, and Heading for Change is the coming together of her life's work, of really bringing together the more than 2 decades of her life experience on advancing the field of gender finance. And last year, she and her husband set up this endowment, seeding it with $1 million of their own investment. And then over the course of the last year, the endowment has more than tripled in size. And the underlying intention of Heading for Change is to create a demonstration portfolio that really indicates the breadth and the spectrum of opportunities that are out there in terms of gender smart climate solutions, as well as to really shine a light on the agents of change. Like I look at Nora, I look at Natalie, I look at Audrey and Debbie and team, and so many of you I know who are at the forefront of this work. And so much of it is about shifting that narrative from women being, we all know this, women and girls are absolutely disproportionately impacted by climate change. But what we're also seeing is that they are at the forefront of solutions. They are closer to the problems, they're more proximate to them. And so the things that women entrepreneurs are coming up with, as well as so many of the women fund managers, not only in our investments, but in the broader field, are coming up with more proximate, fit for purpose capital and really driving the change in order to bridge some of the climate funding gaps. And so our portfolio is designed to be multi-asset class. Right now, we've made 6 investments, and I'm so excited that we have Nora from Unconventional Ventures who are in our portfolio, and also Audrey on our grant side. So we have this blended portfolio where most of it is allocated towards making investments in gender climate fund managers, but also we have a smaller pool of catalytic grant making that we do. And Audrey and her team at Artha Networks have been one of our grantees. And what we're thinking about consistently across the overall portfolio at Heading for Change is, how do we better connect the dots between what's happening on the investment side, but also use our grant making in service of unlocking more capital at scale? So we can definitely get more into some of the specifics But maybe I'll zoom out for a moment and talk very briefly a little bit about the field of gender smart climate finance. It's still a relatively nascent field. It's still a newer intersection. There's lots of amazing work that's happened on the climate finance side, and then lots of amazing work on the gender finance side. But those of us who are thinking about the intersection of how these come together, you know, we're still in that early phase of thinking through what it looks like in practice. And so that's why actually for Heading for Change, a big piece, and forums like this enable us to do this, where we get to connect with others, we get to share what we're learning, we get to collectively, you know, build the field together, really hone in on what are some of the best practices, how does one do due diligence in a way that makes sense, what are some of the tools out there, etc. So a big commitment for us is openly sharing and making sure that we're collectively building the capacity of all the different actors in the field to do this well. If we think about climate finance more broadly, just some of the stats that come to mind for me are the fact that I think it was in last year's Climate Policy Initiative report, they kind of sized the flows of climate finance, and off the $1.3 trillion, and this is across philanthropy to public sector to broader private sector investments, less than 1% had a gender lens applied to that deployment. And so there's a lot of opportunity here for us to be a lot more holistic in our approaches. And the way that not only Heading for Change, but others in the field think about this is that it's also smart investing, right? We are able, by applying a gender and broader diversity and inclusion lens, you're able to see opportunities, but also mitigate risks, and be able to, you know, for example, if you think about how a gender lens gets applied across the spectrum, you can absolutely be thinking about it as a starting point in terms of how diverse is the gender balance in the team, in the investment committee, in the board, but then also to keep sort of peeling back and thinking about where is this showing up in the value chain of this business? Who are the suppliers that they work with? How gender smart is the product, etc. So we'll definitely get more into the practicalities of it. But for example, and I'm just looking at my notes here for the exact number, but if we spend about 1.8 trillion in adaptation and resilience, there could be global sort of benefits of 7.1 trillion. And if you think about like that being integrated with a gender and inclusion lens, there's lots here for us to do collectively, especially if we think about the importance of a just transition and what that actually means in practice. So I think I've waffled enough for now in terms of the overall background of what Heading for Change is about. And we can definitely come back to specifics. So I will hand back to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Sana. Perhaps we shift over to Nora for a moment to share with us like the thesis of Unconventional Ventures, the positioning, the experience of the portfolio building exercise, etc., as well as maybe a little bit of the origin story.
Thank you so much, Audrey, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am one of the lucky few, and I say that with immense respect to the work that is done in this space. And when I talk about one of few, so we are considered to be Europe's first impact fund with a diversity lens. We're in Article 8, meaning SFDR, for those that are aware that the European Union has this agenda for sustainable finance. And there's 3 layers. There's Article 6, 8, and 9, where we are focused on environmental and social impact. So as one of the first funds with a diversity lens, meaning that representation is at the core of what we focus on in in combination with what are the problems or challenges or opportunities they are focusing on. We're a Danish fund. Me, myself, I'm based in Stockholm, Sweden, and my amazing co-founder is based in Copenhagen. And the reason why we became a Danish fund is really an interesting story when it comes to the fundraising environment. And I know we're going to get into that more later. But from a personal perspective, so I'm one of those that came into this world of startups almost, what is it now? Almost 20 years ago. So yes, I'm older than I look. And the reason I ended up in the startup ecosystem was really because I was the first hire into my friend's company. And the interesting part there is that this company originated from Stockholm School of Business. Mind you, I have never heard about Stockholm School of Business until the day I got hired into this company. And it tells you a little bit of the narrative that we have being part of the Nordics, the Swedish ecosystem, because there's this false presumption that we are the world's most gender equal region, which could not be further away from the truth. I think our greatest export has been the parental leave system that we have, which is great, but it comes with a lot of and move into that. But as an example, and I love numbers. We talk about we're being a data-driven fund, meaning that we do take the temperature on the funding gap with your report each year. And it's really not just about, keeping the ecosystem accountable. It's also about keeping ourselves accountable. And in that report, we're doing 6, but for the last 15 years, the percentages in the Nordics, when it comes from a gender lens, we've seen less than 1.5% at most of all venture capital going towards all female founding teams. And I know we're going to dig into some of the aspects of that, but going back to being one of the most perceived as one of the most gender equal region in the world, I've lived under this gender lens perception. And what I've seen is the lack of perspectives, even within that gender lens, meaning what it means when we talk about white diversity from a perspective. Being a refugee myself, ending up in Sweden by chance and not by choice, and thinking that I have access to education, I have access to work, I have access to healthcare, I have access to opportunities. I realized as I'm growing up and then obviously becoming mothers that the access was very limited depending on who I was, what I looked like, and what background I had, even in the terms of what other kind of areas that I have access to. All of this has been instrumental for the strategy that we have in place. So today, 60% or closer to 70% of our investments are focused around climate sustainability, whereas I would say 20% is focused on health, and that is female health. And then we have a 10% focus on education. 70% of our investments after existing as a traditional fund for 2 years are going towards female founders. Within that, 48% of our investments have been invested into ethnic diverse founders. And I say this with respect to what the ecosystem looks like. And I know Sana mentioned a few data points on impact investing from a climate perspective. So there was a report just launched a few weeks ago by European Women in VC, and it stated that over 60% of all impact investing focused on climate is actually happening in the Nordics. So the reason why we're positioned in Nordics and doing this work is even more important, as we have an incredible focus on the climate solutions, but we need to broaden that in terms of whose perspectives are we looking at from when we're solving problems for who. I'm going to leave the mic for you, Sana, but I know we're going to dig into some of these aspects.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you so much. It would be wonderful to hear a little more detail, perhaps, about examples of some of the interventions, the products and service models, the different structures, knowing that Heading for Change has, you know, kind of a bit of a hybrid approach.
Yes.
Perhaps we could get into a little bit of that.
Of course, as an impact fund, we focus first primarily on, obviously, what is the problem, what is the solution, and we look at it from a ESG kind of lens. And from that ESG, we kind of go into our impact measurement assessment. Today, as I mentioned, we invested in 16 companies, and out of those 16 companies, we have companies, software and hardware, in the very early stages. So we invest in the pre-seed and seed stage. Why pre-seed and seed? Well, and also, why do we have such a rigid kind of criteria for those ESG investments? It's really just because it gives us so much more data and so much more potential to, you know, impact the ecosystem, and also with that, the solution from very early stages. And I think obviously some of the criteria for sustainable financing is what we're hoping to change with what we learn from these kind of investments at these early stages, because the criteria for impact investing was created out of the narrative that, you know, there's lots more access to funds for or capital for funds like ours, which in reality, just from a European perspective, I think there's about 5 funds that have closed their first fund that is targeting either climate, I love that new AI of Zoom, but yes, either climate, we love that, or looking at it from a diversity lens. Now we have 3 funds that are targeting, you know, female or from a gender lens, but there's very few with that kind of strategy. And I think for us, it was really about looking at what are the financial metrics to this, and how can we, you know, improve the returns by both having the impact perspective. And I think one of the things that we learned, which I'm really excited about, is software is not going to save the world. And I say this with respect to what we're seeing, particularly because we're coming from a region who's very known and has a very big legacy of software entrepreneurs, right? We have the Spotifys, we have the Klarnas, we have, you know, we have Skypes. And I think what we need to address there as well is the limited solutions when it comes to software. Obviously, for us, as an example, just to mention a few companies, so we invest in the Nordics plus Europe. Why we say plus Europe is because we also have institutional backing from the Danish sovereign fund as well as the Norwegian sovereign fund. So that kind of requires a little bit more appetite for the Nordics. But as I mentioned to you, the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, but the ecosystem for impact investing is much more mature in the Nordics as well. So therefore, it does make sense to have the 70% lens in our investments. But outside of the Nordics, we do focus on UK, Germany, and France. And the reason for these regions is because it's the second market for companies to grow, if not Nordic region, before heading for then US for some. And today we have obviously invested, to mention a few, which I'm really excited about, and actually 2 out of our first 16 investments, 5 of them have closed their second round, their follow-on round, whereas 1 has closed their Series A round. And in this space, I'm really excited to share, because that's going to be announced tomorrow, our first Series A round. But that company is called ClimateX. It's Google for climate change, meaning that they can detect on the very street where climate change will happen, meaning floods, fires, earthquakes, and so on. Why does that matter? Well, obviously, for the first layer, the business model needs to make money, and that is obviously directed towards real estate owners. So you have banks and big financial institutions. They need to have access to this kind of data. But what that data then on the second layer does is it's really creating transparency into what kind of areas are really at risk and needs so much more attention in potentially building better in these areas. Another company of ours based in the Nordics is called Ocean Oasis. It's a desalination of seawater, meaning the world consists of 70% water that cannot be used. Today, this hardware, obviously, with slight component of software, is using wave energy, is able, through a very sustainable process, to create drinking water where there hasn't been able to today. So we're really excited about that. A third company of ours that we're really excited about in the female health space that just closed their seed round is a matchmaking tool for therapists with clients. Meaning today, when we look at the world of mental health, almost 60% of everyone starting to go to therapy drop off session. Today, thanks to their platform, as it's a matchmaking based out of needs, meaning it asks you a lot of questions. It's not focused on what kind of therapy, it's focused on what are your really needs. Their drop-off rate is less than 2%. So we're really excited for what they're doing. We're just about to announce a new investment of ours, which is a hardware component, which is urine tests for early detection of breast cancer. So it's a variety of climate sustainability as well as health. And then obviously, how do we use that kind of strategy when we do our investments? Well, we go into depth into the problem, but also ownership. Because we've been through this sort of light version, and excuse my language, tokenism, when we talk about having a diverse team. But what does the ownership look like? So we look at the cap table. So for us, more than 50% of ownership needs to be in diverse hands. And we look at it from obviously a gender lens, sexual orientation, ethnicity, but that's just an overarch to make it easy for the world to understand what we look at. We can go down a little bit, but it still needs to be above 30%, and that individual needs to, or team needs to be front runner in the company, meaning CEO, CFO, COO potentially, but it needs to be those kind of buckets. And that's how we kind of identify both potential, but also importance of the impact that we can have also from a social perspective. And I think just before I kind of wrap this off is in the climate space, we've completely lost track of social impact. And that is one of my personal, ambitions in this space, is that there isn't, social impact has been kind of reserved for later. And for me, really and truly, climate starts with social. And then we kind of move up in the ladder. So social impact perspective is one of these things that the SFDR is really, stressed about, don't know how to evaluate. If it can evaluate, is really focused from a gender perspective, which is easier, right? And I think there's this presumption in Europe that you cannot measure ethnicity, you can only measure gender, and that's why the gender aspect of it has always been easier. But we're here to say that there are ways to measure other aspects of diversity, and we've really tried to do that in a very transparent way for our, I think, ambition, besides being a 3-layer fund. So a 3-layer impact fund, it's who me and my co-founder are, because less than 1% of asset under management today goes to female GPs, meaning the founders of venture funds. And then you have the what, it's the problems or the solutions. And the third layer, the who, meaning the founders that we back in this. And I think for us, it's really about being that fund that can impact the ecosystem, because at the end of the day, we're a small, our ambition was 30 million. We raised 22 million. And I think as a small 22 million fund, euros, we've all obviously understood that we're very limited, but in order to accelerate this, we need to have a top-down approach, and it goes to who's investing in later stages to all the way down to who are the angel investors, and that's how we build the ecosystem.
Thank you, Nora. Sana, Perhaps over to you to pick up the baton on the same topic.
Sure. And Natalie, I'd love to bring you in here too, for some of the more specific examples. But where my mind was going was maybe also to share a little bit about our approach and why we decided, first of all, to focus on investing in funds. If we think about like where are some of the levers for more systemic change, getting more hands into gender diverse teams and allocators is absolutely from a broader field level perspective. You know, Nora, you referenced the 1% under management by women and people of color. We have to change that, right? And so for us at Heading for Change, investing in funds is one sort of measure of being able to do that. And alongside these catalytic grants that we're making, as I said, are meant to complement how the capital flows. From a portfolio perspective, we have a global remit, and Natalie can speak more to some of the amazing opportunities that we have been scanning in the market. And ideally, our portfolio will reflect a snapshot, I think, of where the world currently is at in terms of climate managers that are integrating a gender lens. In terms of our investments to date, we have 6 in the portfolio, and these are across a sort of geographic range, but also type, because for us, what's important is to really shine a light on the different vehicles that are out there, the different ways to move capital. So they could be in a more traditional private equity venture capital structure, or perhaps those that are trying to, you know, leverage some more innovative structures as well. It could be from a thematic perspective, funds that are very deep on nature-based solutions and biodiversity, as well as, and Nora, thank you for bringing up this point that software is not going to save the world. So absolutely. But Natalie, I'd love it if to bring your voice into some of the more specific examples as well.
Yeah, sure. Before I do that, I also just wanted to take a step back to this idea of the demonstration portfolio. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do with the investment team is try to find the pain points that investors or LPs have with understanding and accessing the space. As I think, as many of you may have known, if you knew Suzanne, like more capital and really moving flow from, you know, institutional high net worth and family offices as well as DFIs into this space was so important for her. And so a lot of the work we've been doing is try to like, how can we backward integrate and understand where the pain points, where the myths are that need to be busted, where kind of these underlying assumptions are coming from, and then how can we build an open source tools, including pipelines. We're working together with Artha to create a really beautiful and deep and rich pipeline opportunity set that we're going to be sharing and open sourcing, again, to kind of, how do you say, bust the myth that there's not enough pipeline or not enough exciting deal flow in this space. We've already shared our investment criteria on our website, which of course is very specific to Heading for Change, but can be a great blueprint and template for any investor then to kind of overlay their own values and the things that are really important to them to help to drive their strategy. We have high level kind of portfolio construction on our website, and there is also something we're going to be sharing and open sourcing more, because I know that that's very critical for investors to also understand how could you construct such a portfolio, and then all the way down to a scorecard that we will also be sharing, you know, toward the end of our journey, that again adds this kind of quantitative framework to how can you assess and kind of place different opportunities next to each other, looking at their climate, their gender, and the nexus of climate and gender. So we're working really hard on this on the tools side. But I think personally what gets me really excited is the storytelling. As well as the, you know, the demonstration portfolio. We want to inspire people, and we want people to see to believe what's possible and to expand their ideas of what they thought a climate and gender fund would be, or some tokenistic, you know, maybe an old idea of microfinance for women, or seeing women as victims. And actually, I should say it's beyond women, because we're taking a more diverse and holistic lens here. But, you know, it's really like, how can we flip the narrative and inspire and expand people to see beyond kind of this colonial lens, for lack of a better word, and very conditioned lens that people have been taught to view, whether it's on an investment basis, and to help them to kind of work through some of the unconscious biases that come up in the investment process. So that's what gets me really excited about doing this work. And I think, for me, the first time we spoke with Nora, I mean, it was just this beautiful, deep, raw, vulnerable conversation. And for me, as much as data is super important, I think we've become so focused on, well, what does the model say, and what does the numbers, and what is my board going to say? And we've forgotten to understand the relational aspect of investment. And investment is really about trust. And I think, so we're really trying to kind of combine the left and the right brain, let's say the head and the heart, with our approach, and that we're really also listening, constantly learning and evolving our approach. I actually felt really expanded by doing our climate and gender DD on Nora and the fund, because they were taking such a founder-driven and diversity-driven approach. So it was really challenging some of the maybe representation or elements that I was coming with, and helping me to think beyond, like, we're starting with the founders. We're starting with their lived experience. We're starting with the problems that they're seeing in their communities and the solutions that have come organically from wanting to solve this problem. So that's what gets me very kind of excited. And like I said, we're going to be open sourcing a lot of the tools and frameworks, which I think are super important, but equally is really the storytelling, is showcasing these incredible fund managers and the companies that they support, and the long-term impacts that we think that they're having on the ground.
Natalie, thank you so much. Audrey, I just wanted to add one piece, which is that I think that this is why the sort of collective action here is also really important, right? So our portfolio is or will be a subsection of what's out there, but we also want to be supportive to the funds that we're not able to invest in. Like, so where possible, how do we help bridge connections? How do we feature these opportunities to a broader market? And our grant towards Artha Networks and the platform that they're building out is an integral component for that. And I know Audrey will be speaking more to what we are dreaming up and building out there. But really for us, it's how do we connect these dots in the ecosystem better with that underlying goal of moving more capital at this nexus? Because absolutely, if we only have a sort of one-sided approach to climate, these are holistic issues. They're very interconnected. And I love that the Unconventional portfolio also has a health component, because climate, gender, and health, they are connected, and there are obviously lots of you on this call who have other intersections too. And I think that it's really essential to take these more structural and systemic approaches because of that intersectionality in the way that all these issues show up, but also not to get lost in too much process, right? I think it can then feel too overwhelming. And then just maybe lastly, like at Heading for Change for us, yes, the what is important. And Natalie and Rose, our other amazing investment team member, will always say it's the how. Our how is just as important. And I love that you double down on the relational aspect of this. But ultimately, we're also trying to show what a commercial as well as broader, investable opportunity set looks like. But pausing there, Audrey.
Thank you, Sana. I might just say maybe two more words about what it is that we seek to achieve together with Heading for Change as basically a community of practice, an investor network building exercise and collaboration platform, so that all of us don't just get to connect on a call like this for 60 minutes, that there's a place that we can actually come back to profile what we all do, because it's difficult even in a conference to actually have any level of depth in these interactions. So we can profile there what it is that we respectively do. And our goal there, we've recognized that more intentional, technical, operational efforts to contextualize the deal pipeline and these types of opportunities is necessary. So to this end, our goal will be to launch a version of a system, a light version that will curate exactly these kinds of opportunities, so that investors and donors who appreciate products and services sitting at this nexus, however they may wish to define it, can find what they're looking for and see who's working on what. It's simply just that. I think it's ultimately a call to work together as that community of that language of the community of practice in all aspects of the typical process of funding, which usually includes discovery and diligence and ultimately co-investment. So that was just a few words there. I wanted to just raise one point, and I would love to field questions from the group. There are a lot of amazing organizations who do so much in terms of like resilience and notably in supporting women's health, income generation opportunities that may not be, they may be nonprofit in structure, they may be hybrid in structure. And the for-profit ones are obviously a lot easier for the investors and the equity impact and equity investors in the group to look at, depending on the jurisdiction. Any comments or thoughts about this spectrum of the nonprofit interventions and how some of these are quite hybrid in nature and moving in a certain direction? Any reflections there that may be helpful? Nora, Arsana?
I'm happy to start, and I think it looks like Julie would love to bring your voice in as well. I think that you're spot on, Audrey, that there are lots of gaps. Like when we talked about the climate finance gaps, this goes across the full spectrum of structures and types of entities. I think, for example, I was looking recently, or maybe a month ago, that there was a program that came out of one of these institutions that was being funded where they had over 1,000 applicants for nonprofits and they were only able to select 4. So we also have to acknowledge that the system is a little bit broken because what it takes for smaller organizations to put together applications for this type of stuff is quite an onus. The one program that comes to mind, which maybe others are aware of, is an amazing initiative under that USAID has seeded in partnership with Amazon, Visa Foundation, UPS Foundation, Reckitt, and which is managed, the grants pool is managed by 2X Global, called the Climate Gender Equity Fund, and they've done one funding round and then are in the process of deciding on the second funding round, and there's a few more to go. And that program is quite great because it covers the spectrum of both for-profit, non-profit, and fund managers as well. So that could be one to look at. But other than saying that there's a gap in funding and there's a few programs, I think I'll just be honest and say there's a lot that needs to be done here. Heading for Change is one example of an endowment that's trying to bridge that gap, but we could use 100, 1,000 Heading for Changes or many other programs, at scale, because clearly there's a lot to do. But Nora, Natalie would love your thoughts as well.
So I think I'm going to share a little bit of resources that we have. So we keep track of different kind of groups and communities that have access to some sort of funding. So I'm going to share that with you so you can share with the group or even put it on your website. But I think one of the frustrations, if I might add, I have is that so 2 things. So it's about structural change, but we use the same system, meaning capitalism, right, to change something, which is really hard. Then how do you change things? And I think that's kind of what we're on discovery to understanding is how we can work with that, the tool today. The second part is there's a lot of grants and funding going towards mentorship and teaching, women and diverse founders. And I would urge for everyone that has the opportunity to put money where they're going to directly to the work that needs to be done and get done, rather than keep over mentoring potential founders that really just needs the capital to get to work and run. And I think we've kind of stated this consensus of pause making, as if I might add, where we literally are focusing on maintaining the status quo for this group. So, and in condition to that, or in relation to that, I would like, if I may have an ask, that if you are in a position of having access to public money, whoever works in the public, capital, finance, we're in a system where public money that should be diverse by default, meaning our tax money, is waiting on private money to make the first move. And the changes that we're seeing is really private, urging that this is where we want to put our money. Like, where are you? And then you have the private institutions hiding behind some sort of risk assessment, as if the status quo isn't the biggest risk of all. So I'm going to share resources, but then I would just have an ask that in that work of feeling that you want to be involved in creating change, then the change really happens at where capital is utilized as a tool for accelerating a possibility and not maintaining some sort of learning, whatever that might mean. Because what are we teaching or learning? Innovation is by doing things in completely new ways. So who are we to say this is the way things should get done? So I just want to add that to the conversation of understanding what resources to go to, I think.
Thank you, Nora. Yeah, absolutely. That is so important. And I think if we can actually amalgamate suggested resources from across the board, from across this group, that could be a useful compendium at some point. I would love to ask if folks have questions. We have 10 minutes left. Questions, comments, Julie.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's so wonderful to see some familiar faces from years ago. I'm Julie Blaine. I've recently launched The Table, and I invite everybody in this call to have a look. The Table is a co-investment platform, and it really takes off everything that Nora and Sana and Audrey and Natalie has been talking about. And I'll give a shout out to Debbie, who I worked with together with Suzanne. So the Table is a co-investment community focused on funding women-led climate ventures. We launched about 3 weeks ago. We have 52 funds on board the platform now. We are starting to share deals, and there's a couple of observations that we've made. And on the back of that, I have a key question also around this capital stacks. So my co-founder, Carmel, and I founded The Table, and I'll put the link in the chat now, because we saw, like many of you, the underfunding of women with climate solutions. And as mentors and angel investors, we also get that, money talks, and money's what is going to move the needle. We do find, we don't know why, we'll investigate, some hesitancy for investors coming into first-time founders and investors coming into deep tech and new materials type of investment. So we are starting The Table with a little bit of a theory of change, and it's a bit of an experiment. We are asking funds to sign up as members of The Table, to bring a deal they are investing in, whether they're a lead investor or not, and to look for co-investors amongst the community of The Table. So we think this will work because we think this will bring momentum, and we're talking about early stage equity. But what we are finding, and here comes the question, is that angel investors and early stage equity funds cannot bear the brunt of solving the climate crisis on our shoulders alone. We need those later stage funds to be interested and invested earlier on. And in order to de-risk for later stage capital, we see an urgent need for non-dilutive equity, for grants, for recoverable loans to come into this early stage alongside equity investment. And we are looking to catalyze that investment opportunity, both for equity as well as for grant funders. So The Table is starting with membership of early stage equity, but we also welcome funds and grant makers who are supporting climate solutions, who are supporting gender diversity, to speak with us about how we could co-design a grant fund to sit alongside the early stage equity. So my question to you is, where in the UK, we've got UK Innovate, Heading for Change, obviously, is there, not making direct investments, but we are hungry to look for, we're thirsty and hungry to put up those resources. So can I just also ask, Audrey, that when we put up the sort of combined resources that are available to founders and funders, that we have just sort of a page of signposting where those grant makers are at the moment, and maybe we could build a co-investing platform for the grant makers as well as for the equity funders.
Sure, Julie. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's super valuable. And I think there's a lot of complementarity, certainly around aggregating enough of the right players for the capital stack to actually become a stack in practice. One of the approaches, I think, is always to look at the due diligence elements and see, okay, what's needed? And on the back of that, what's appropriate? And then making sure that we get the right people visible and connected. So we should definitely discuss that further. I'd love to hear from Tasneem and then from Jen.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really think the idea of a community of practice would be so great for people like us who are trying to make a difference in a small little way. And I can share a lot of examples of how the kind of wall we are facing to get project developers to do gender mainstreaming right and correct, because there's like, these are just a few tick boxes we need to, show our investors, and that is it. So they will not go further in pushing gender mainstreaming or empowerment in the true sense. So also gender empowerment is only looked at, for example, economic empowerment. No one is looking at the social and political empowerment part of it at all. So I think this is one thing that I want to just share, that this is very difficult. And the second thing I want to share is that we have a live project going on in India, Rajasthan right now. And we spoke to the women monitors out there who are responsible, and I'll send the link. You can see some of the work we're doing there. And they said, great, we are helping with the climate action. We're using cook stoves, we're helping other women to do the cook stoves. But our needs are very different as well. We don't have water. We don't have a marketplace where we can go to. We don't have schools nearby. We cannot take decision making. So I think the investor lens also needs to say that what are the needs and aspirations of the women out there at the local level. So I think we're not talking about ourselves here. We're still one of the privileged lot, but climate finance and gender is really very much connected at the local level. I've worked on sextortion, where there is drought, women are paying for water through sex. So these are the elements that we have to start bringing in, and especially connecting it to the local rural women or in remote areas where we can make gender finance or the gender lens much more impactful. So I just wanted to share my thoughts, and I would love to take this conversation forward, because I think there's so much to learn from you. For people like us coming from the nonprofit, where we don't understand this investment jargon so well. So thanks very much for all the wonderful words, and looking forward to the interaction.
Thank you, Tasneem. And Power South, you shared the link about Power South in the chat. I urge you all to click on it. Jen, and then Naoko.
Hi, thanks so much, Audrey and Deborah, and thank you so much to all the speakers. Sorry, I have a terrible cold, so I hope you can hear me okay. Firstly, just to echo what Tasneem is saying, so I had a couple of questions. One is a question, and the second is just an observation. I work for the International Astronomical Union, and we in Cape Town, although I work remotely in the Netherlands, and we have a big program called Astrotourism, which is especially focused on getting rural enterprise up and going, particularly for women. We fund quite a lot of these initiatives in the global south, and it just comes back to exactly what Tasneem is saying. Like, if we don't, I'm hearing all this wonderful stuff, but it's still completely inaccessible to these communities. Location is a massive problem. We could even work with an observatory in South Africa, for example, but even then they don't have. This is still inaccessible finance, but actually, as we've seen in some of our other funding, seed funding opportunities, that it's actually a fantastic investment. But we've got to try and bridge that gap between the people on the ground and the rest of us sat here. So just an observation that we're seeing through our work, and we have partnerships with South African government, with local authority, and so on. So it's not it's still a problem even with those networks. So sort of I'd like to hear, maybe not here, but perhaps as part of the platform you're developing, Audrey, is there more advice that can be shared that helps us get these resources out to those communities and enables them to apply for them as well? So that was one thought. And then just the other, just to go to Nora, I thought what you said was absolutely spot on. We're using the tools of capitalism to try and fix a problem that kind of partly caused the problem in the first place. So, Audrey and Deborah know my feelings on this, but it's, it is a real problem. So how do we use that to actually, drive that generational change? And just, I completely agreed with what you're saying. Everything that you said, particularly for ethnic communities. And just an observation, again, in the Netherlands, it's very difficult to actually capture that ethnicity information. It's illegal for universities to record data. There was this big sort of coalition of all the vice chancellors went to the ministry to try and change it. So there's an ongoing discussion in the Netherlands, but that is a big problem in Europe. So it's hard for us to actually monitor what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for raising these really important points. It's a whole other discussion, which we can maybe leave for a part 2, but at some point, discussing the actual technical tools and methods that we're able to use to capture the feedback loop directly from beneficiaries, so that they're not left out and aside. That is a big, big challenge and question, notably because it's very expensive at the moment still. So it'd be really interesting and useful for us to maybe put our heads together as a group to think about what elements may be useful. Naoko, would love to hear your comment, and then we'll have to wrap, I'm afraid.
Hi, this has been really, really very interesting. Thank you for everyone's input. I just had a little comment to what Julie said in terms of like bringing the different kind of capitals. And I was just thinking of what has existed for so long, like the first blended finance product, like the CDO type of things for microfinance funds. And if you think about it, in the bottom of it, it would be like the government or foundations, the kind of first loss or junior tranche kind of things that support the other players that come in for investment. So it's only about thinking, how can you bring like the grant side of things through either governments or foundations that don't need the return, and to combine that so that it can be appealing for other investors, impact investors, to come in. That's it.
Thank you. I'll send you a note.
Thank you. Really quickly, Nora.
So I just really wanted just to talk about what Julie asked in terms of de-risking or de-risking the later stage investments. And one of the things that we needed to do, which I never even planned to, and I mean, we did 13 investments before through SPVs before we managed to raise the fund. And never in those first 13 did I think that finally, when having a conventional fund, we would de-risk by not leading the investment rounds, but creating co-leads with male-led funds was a way for us to de-risk. And I just want to share that really quickly. That's how we needed to do it. And it really had paid off now, looking at the follow-on investments happening in our portfolio. But that's a different topic. And then going back, I think at the end of the day, talking about capitalism and how we utilize that as a tool, as for now, it's really about changing the decision makers. It comes at the very core of everything we do. So I think as long as we can focus on that, we're kind of progressing in the right direction, not fast enough. And obviously, there's lots of layers on where to start and where to end up. And we're obviously a little bit here because of looking at venture capital as a tool. But at the end of the day, it is a coalition of the ecosystem.
Yeah, it is, Nora. So hopefully, as we come together, as these various platforms emerge, by financing, the new groups and differently minded entrepreneurs and founders of, in different places, we're going to be able to support some of this narrative. It dawns on me that we could go on for another hour. There's so many other topics we could get into, again, related just to this particular subject of the nexus of climate and gender. Maybe that means we'll do a part 2. We had 80 signups for the session, and I think at our height we've been maybe 50 people today, which is pretty good. Thank you all so much for being with us. This was just a wonderful session. Sana, Natalie, It's been wonderful. Nora, thank you very much for sharing all of your insights and your experience. And we'll have to continue this and exchange further thoughts. We'll amalgamate the links that people have shared. And Debbie, I'll let Debbie close because she does it much better than me. But it was a joy to be with you all today.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much, Audrey, for moderating this so smoothly. Also, big thanks to the speakers. It was very inspiring to hear your work and what you do. So I totally agree. We should do a session 2 or 3. We could deep dive into specific topics to do another session maybe after the summer. Just want to mention, I see that a few documents and guides have been mentioned here in the chat field. So what we'll do on Impact for Breakfast, we'll be launching in end of August, we'll be launching a learning center where we'll have all the documents, recording anything that investors can look for or you can look for. It can be saved and looked for. So anything you have, guides, anything, please send it over to me. I'll share some of it in the follow-up note with the recording, so you can share it with others. But please also share it with me so I can actually save it on the system for Impact for Breakfast, which you can where you can look for other documents as well. So that's it from my side as well. Also, huge thank you for everyone that joined today, and looking forward to seeing you after the summer. So that's our last virtual session that we had at the Impact for Breakfast session. So very exciting to see you sometime in fall.